When Suzanne's remains were finally discovered in September 2023, forensic analysis revealed something deeply unsettling. Many of her bones were sun-bleached, scattered, and incomplete. Her shoes were missing. Parts of her skeleton were gone entirely. Experts determined that her body had decomposed somewhere else before being moved to this remote location months after her death. Suzanne bought a voice-activated spy pen to catch Barry cheating, but accidentally recorded her own explicit affair conversations, which he discovered. Barry claimed a romantic steak dinner and sex the night before, then said he shot chipmunks, causing odd phone pings around the house. His truck doors opened and closed while he slept, and he made suspicious trash runs in separate cans far away.
The call came in at 5:46 p.m. on May 10, 2020, Mother's Day. A neighbor reported that Suzanne Morphew was missing. Her daughters had been trying to reach her all day, text messages sent into the void, phone calls that rang and rang with no answer. Suzanne, who never missed a chance to talk to her girls, had gone silent. Her husband wasn't home either. Barry Morphew was supposedly in Broomfield, hours away, working a landscaping job. The daughters, panicked and far from the house, had asked a neighbor named Martin to check on their mother. He knocked on the front door. No response. He peered through windows. Nothing. And when he looked in the garage, he noticed something odd. Suzanne's mountain bike was gone. By 7:30 that evening, the situation had escalated. Officers made their way along County Road 225, a narrow strip of asphalt that winds off Highway 50. The road hugs steep embankments and rocky drops, the kind of terrain where a cycling accident could easily turn fatal. They moved slowly, scanning the hillsides, hoping to spot either Suzanne or her bicycle. Then they found it. A blue Santa Cruz mountain bike, lying awkwardly near the edge of a ravine, the front wheel pointed sharply downward toward the creek below. At first glance, it looked exactly like the aftermath of a crash, someone losing control on a descent, the bike tumbling into the rocks. But as Deputy Brown approached, the scene started to feel wrong. There was no blood, no skid marks, no disturbed vegetation. The ground around the bike was smooth and untouched, as if no one had ever been there. And the bike itself was in perfect condition. No bent frame, no broken gears, no scratches on the handlebars. It hadn't been ridden down that hill. It had been placed there. When the deputy lifted the bike back onto the trail, he noticed something stranger. The front brake was seized. The handlebars had been twisted hard to the left, wrapping the brake cable so tightly around the frame that riding it would have been impossible. And above, where the bike supposedly fell from, the dirt shoulder was pristine. No tire tracks, no signs of impact, nothing. If Suzanne had crashed here, the evidence should have been everywhere, but there was nothing at all. Officers decided to head to the Morphew property. When they arrived, Suzanne's daughter's boyfriend was waiting for them, visibly anxious. He explained that the girls had been texting their mother since morning. None of the messages had gone through. Their father was in Denver for work. The house was empty. The bike was missing. And now, hours later, still no word. Then one of the officers asked a question that seemed casual, but wasn't. Did Barry and Suzanne get along pretty well? The boyfriend hesitated. He glanced away. Then he admitted what others in their circle already knew. The marriage had problems. Normal stuff, he said at first. Then he corrected himself. They'd talked about separating. Just like that, a shadow of motive appeared. Less than 30 minutes later, Barry Morphew pulled up in his truck. He stepped out, face drained of color, eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock. When officers showed him where the bike had been found, his voice cracked. "Is it a crash?" he asked. The deputies told him there wasn't much damage to the bike. Barry stared down at the ravine, shaking his head slowly. But while Barry stood there playing the part of a devastated husband, detectives had already been inside the house, and what they found raised more questions than answers. A cracked door frame in the master bedroom, a plastic cap from a tranquilizer syringe discovered inside the dryer alongside bedding, an unspent bullet casing lying on the floor next to their bed, linen from their daughter's room stripped and piled to the side. None of it made immediate sense, but all of it felt wrong. To understand what happened that Mother's Day, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to Alexandria, Illinois, where Barry and Suzanne grew up in the same small town. Barry was 4 years older, a star athlete who'd been drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays. He was confident, popular, the kind of guy everyone knew. Suzanne was warm and kind, the youngest of 4 children, a girl who lit up every room she entered. They started dating when she was still in high school. By all accounts, they were smitten. They shared the same Midwestern values, the same faith, the same vision of a future together. On August 5, 1994, they married in a picture-perfect summer wedding. Suzanne was 23. Barry was 27. It looked like a love story destined to last forever. In the early years, it did. Suzanne became an elementary school teacher, beloved by her students. Barry built a landscaping business from the ground up, earning a reputation as a hard worker and a provider. 6 years into their marriage, they welcomed their first daughter, Mallory. 4 years later came Macy. The girls became their entire world. But life wasn't without hardship. In her 20s, Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. She beat it once, only to face it again years later. Through it all, Barry stood by her side. He held her hand through chemotherapy, through the fear, through the uncertainty. When she finally went into remission in 2018, it felt like they'd been given a second chance. That same year, they decided on a fresh start. They sold their home in Indiana and moved to Colorado, purchasing a $1.5 million property on 7 acres of land near Salida. Their oldest daughter was already attending college there. The move seemed to make sense. New environment, new beginning. But the cracks in their marriage didn't heal. They only deepened. Friends began to hear troubling things. Suzanne confided in her siblings that Barry had a temper, that he was controlling, that he monitored her constantly, always needing to know where she was, who she was talking to, what she was doing. She felt suffocated, trapped. And then, in 2018, she reconnected with an old friend from high school. His name was Jeff. It started innocently enough, a message on LinkedIn. "Howdy, stranger." But what began as casual conversation soon turned into something more. By 2019, the affair had become physical. They used burner phones to communicate. They met in secret during Suzanne's trips out of town. In early 2020, they even took a trip to Florida together.
All the while, Suzanne kept a private list on her phone. She titled it 50 Reasons Why I Want Barry to Leave. When your relationship problems require a spreadsheet, you know the end is near. Barry wasn't oblivious. He grew suspicious. He demanded to see her phone. He followed her when she went out with friends. He sent messages that swung wildly between desperate affection and seething anger. And he had reason to be suspicious. Between October 2018 and December 2019, Suzanne and Jeff called each other 738 times. But by 2020, Suzanne had made up her mind. She was done. On May 6th, she told Barry it was over. After 26 years of marriage, she wanted out. 4 days later, she disappeared. The timeline of that Mother's Day morning is where Barry's story begins to crumble. He claimed he left the house at 5 in the morning, kissing Suzanne goodbye while she slept. He said he was driving to Broomfield for a landscaping job. He texted her later to wish her a happy Mother's Day. No response. By afternoon, he asked a neighbor to check on her. When he was told the bike was missing, he didn't rush home. Instead, he stayed on the job for several more hours. He didn't arrive back in Salida until nearly 9 that night. But phone records and GPS data told a very different story. At 2:47 p.m. on May 10th, Barry's phone switched into airplane mode. For the next hour, GPS tracking showed his phone bouncing erratically all over the property. When questioned later, Barry claimed he'd been outside shooting chipmunks with a rifle. Chipmunks. Detectives didn't believe him. They believed something far darker. They believed Barry had tranquilized Suzanne, that he'd chased her through the house as the drug took hold, that she ran, stumbling, her vision blurring, her legs weakening, until she finally collapsed. Photos taken of Barry the next day showed scratches and abrasions covering his hands and arms. He said they were from work, but they looked like defensive wounds, like someone had clawed at him, fighting desperately to get away. Then there was the drive to Broomfield. Barry wasn't even supposed to go that day. The job was scheduled for Monday, and he was meant to travel with a coworker. But instead, he left alone before dawn on Sunday morning, and along the way he made 5 separate stops at dumpsters scattered across town. Surveillance footage captured him tossing trash bags into bins behind a gas station outside a McDonald's near his hotel. He claimed he was getting rid of work debris, but investigators believed he was disposing of evidence: bloody rags, tranquilizer dart packaging, anything that could connect him to what he'd done. Inside one of those dumpsters, officers found an empty dart case. It matched the exact type Barry owned. And here's the thing that makes it all so damning. All of this happened before anyone knew Suzanne was missing. Back at the hotel, a cleaner reported that Barry's room reeked of bleach when he checked out. Wet towels were scattered everywhere. Barry said he was just washing off dust, but the smell told a different story. It smelled like someone scrubbing away a crime. 10 days after Suzanne vanished, investigators found something unexpected tucked in the back of her closet: a spy pen. It looked like an ordinary ballpoint, but it was actually a recording device. Suzanne had bought it because she suspected Barry was having an affair. She wanted proof. But the only thing the pen captured were recordings of her own affair with Jeff. It took 6 months to identify the man on those recordings. Jeff, who lived in Michigan with his own wife and children, hadn't come forward after Suzanne disappeared. He'd deleted all their messages out of fear. But once officers tracked him down, he cooperated fully, and he was cleared of any involvement. Still, the affair provided context. Barry had every reason to feel betrayed, but betrayal doesn't justify murder. Months passed. Search parties combed the wilderness surrounding Salida. Volunteers, Neighbors, the FBI. They searched on foot, on ATVs, in boats, from helicopters. They found nothing. Barry went on television, tears streaming down his face. "Suzanne, if anyone out there has you, please. We'll do whatever it takes. We love you. We miss you. Your girls need you." He looked like a man shattered by grief. But behind the scenes, investigators were building a case. And in May 2021, they arrested him. Barry was charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and attempting to influence a public servant. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The tranquilizer dart cap in the dryer, the GPS data showing frantic movement around the property, the scratches on his arms, the dumpster runs, the bleach-soaked hotel room, the lies that kept changing every time he opened his mouth. But there was one critical problem. They didn't have a body. Without Suzanne's remains, the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. And in April 2022, facing mounting pressure and missed deadlines, the prosecution made a shocking decision. They dismissed all charges. Barry walked out of the Fremont County Courthouse, grinning, his daughters flanking him on either side. They'd stood by him through everything, convinced of his innocence. Barry moved to Arizona. He filed a $15 million lawsuit against law enforcement. He tried to move on. But the story wasn't over. On September 22, 2023, a team conducting an unrelated search in the wilderness of Sawachi County stumbled upon a shallow grave. Inside were skeletal remains, scattered and sun-bleached. Dental records confirmed what everyone had feared. It was Suzanne. The location was remote, a dry clearing near the tiny town of Moffett, about 45 miles south of Salida. Many of her bones were missing. Her shoes were gone. Fragments of her clothing light lay scattered nearby, and a single unfired bullet was found near the grave. Anthropologists believed her body had decomposed somewhere else before being moved to this location months later. Someone had transported her remains, likely spooked by the investigation, and hidden them in a more distant spot.
When the autopsy results came back in April 2024, they revealed something crucial. Traces of BAM were found in Suzanne's system, a powerful wildlife tranquilizer, and Barry Morphew was the only person in the entire state of Colorado licensed to purchase it. On June 21, 2025, Barry was arrested again, this time in Arizona. He didn't resist. He told officers he'd been expecting this day to come. Now, as of this writing, Barry sits in a Colorado jail awaiting trial. His bond is set at $3 million cash. His daughters still stand by him, convinced he's being unfairly targeted. But the evidence paints a different picture. A picture of control, obsession, and rage that turned deadly on a spring morning when a woman finally decided she'd had enough. Records show Barry obtained multiple prescriptions for BAM while still living in Indiana. He'd been using it on deer as recently as April 2020, 1 month before Suzanne disappeared. Between 2017 and 2020, not a single zoo, veterinarian, or wildlife official in the region reported using or purchasing BAM. Only Barry. During his time as free man, Barry even committed voter fraud, casting a ballot in Suzanne's name during the 2020 election. When questioned by the FBI, he shrugged and said he just wanted Trump to win. He figured Suzanne would have voted for him anyway. He claimed he didn't realize it was illegal, but he pleaded guilty to forgery. No jail time, but it revealed something important about his character. He was willing to bend rules, to lie, to get what he wanted. The trial is coming. Prosecutors believe they finally have everything they need. Suzanne's body, the chemical evidence, the timeline, the motive. Barry's legal team is preparing for war, but the walls are closing in. Over the 5 years since that Mother's Day, this case has twisted through theories, arrests, setbacks, and now finally toward justice. Suzanne didn't deserve what happened to her. She deserved to grow old with her daughters. She deserved peace. But this wasn't a simple story of good versus evil. Suzanne had an affair. She planted recording devices in her own home. There were layers of dysfunction in that marriage that went both ways. But if Barry was as controlling and volatile as people claimed, then leaving wasn't as simple as just walking out the door. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is when the victim finally decides to leave. In hindsight, the marriage should have ended years earlier. The hundreds of text messages between Barry and Suzanne paint a portrait of a man both self-loathing and explosively reactive. A man who couldn't let go. A man who, when faced with losing everything, may have decided that if he couldn't have Suzanne, no one could. The mountains around Salida are breathtaking, but they're also unforgiving. They keep secrets buried in their shadows and their valleys, and sometimes, years later, those secrets finally come to light. Suzanne Morphew vanished on Mother's Day 2020. Her remains were found in 2023. And now, in 2025, her accused killer awaits trial. The outcome feels inevitable, but until the jury speaks, the story remains unfinished. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it just takes longer to arrive.
Matthew Dunmeyer was 31 years old when his life ended in a cemetery tucked inside a national park. Those who knew him described a man who moved through the world with easy kindness, the type of person who played guitar late into the night and showed up when friends needed help. He grew up loving music, listening to Frank Zappa with his father, and finding his own rhythm on a worn acoustic guitar. By the time he reached adulthood, Matthew had built a life in Hudson, Ohio, surrounded by friends who felt more like family and 2 children who looked up to him. He worked hard, laughed often, and carried himself with the sort of laid-back confidence that made people feel comfortable around him. Nothing about Matthew suggested his life would end violently. Nothing about him hinted that someone from his past harbored a rage so deep that it would one day consume him entirely. On the evening of March 5th, 2021, Matthew sat in a bar called Tiki Underground, sharing drinks with coworkers after a long week. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and Friday nights felt like ritual. Matthew mentioned casually that he had plans for the weekend, explaining that an old friend from Virginia was passing through Cleveland and they had decided to catch up. He booked an Airbnb about 40 miles north, planning to spend the night and take a walk the next morning. It sounded simple, almost mundane, just 2 people reconnecting after years of silence. But as Matthew's phone lit up with a text message around 6 in the evening, something shifted. He glanced down, looked up at his friends, and said that the girl he knew online had arrived. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked outside into the fading daylight. His supervisor followed him out, wanting to say goodbye before the weekend. They shook hands. In the parking lot, a small white smart car idled with its rear lights glowing softly. Behind the wheel sat a woman with brown hair. Matthew waved, climbed into the passenger seat, and the car pulled away, disappearing into the evening traffic. It was the last time anyone who loved him would see him alive. Chelsea Perkins had spent years building an image that existed in two separate worlds. In one world, she was a former United States Coast Guard member, a woman who had served her country with honor before transitioning into civilian life. She'd married a fellow service member, had 2 children, and settled into the rhythms of motherhood and domesticity in Northern Virginia. But in another world, one that existed primarily online, Chelsea became Selena Savage. She built a career in adult entertainment, posting content on platforms like OnlyFans and cultivating a following that knew nothing about her past, her family, or the trauma she claimed had shaped her. Those who knew Chelsea personally described her as intense, someone whose emotions ran close to the surface and whose behavior could be unpredictable. Former classmates from the Coast Guard used words like insane and bizarre when describing her, though nothing in her background suggested violence. There were no arrests, no criminal charges, no documented incidents that would have raised alarm bells. On paper, Chelsea appeared stable, even if her double life raised eyebrows among those who knew both versions of her. The connection between Chelsea and Matthew stretched back to their high school years in Virginia, though the details of their friendship remain murky. What is clear is that at some point in 2017, something happened between them that would fracture whatever relationship they had. Chelsea went to the police with a disturbing allegation, claiming that Matthew had sexually assaulted her. She wanted charges pressed, wanted justice served, wanted someone to believe her. But after investigating her claim, authorities determined there was insufficient evidence to pursue the case. No charges were filed, no trial took place. Matthew, for his part, was stunned by the accusation, telling friends that the encounter had been entirely consensual and that he couldn't understand why Chelsea would say otherwise. His friends rallied around him, describing him as gentle and kind, the sort of man incapable of the violence Chelsea described. But whether the allegation was true or false, one thing became undeniable. Chelsea never let it go. The resentment festered, growing heavier with each passing year, until it became something far more dangerous than anger. It became a plan.
In February of 2021, Chelsea reached out to Matthew on Facebook after years of silence. She told him she would be driving through Cleveland on her way to Michigan for a tattoo appointment and suggested they meet up. Matthew agreed. It seemed harmless enough, 2 old acquaintances reconnecting for a weekend. He told his friends and co-workers about the plan, explaining that he would be gone overnight but back by Sunday. Nobody thought twice about it. Nobody questioned why Chelsea would drive over 300 miles just to see him. Nobody noticed the red flags hidden beneath the surface of casual conversation. On March 5th, Chelsea left Virginia in her husband's white smart car, heading north toward Ohio. She had packed carefully, bringing everything she needed for the trip, including a 9mm Springfield Armory handgun registered in her name. She booked an Airbnb under her own name, paid with her own credit card, and left a digital trail so obvious that it almost seemed intentional. By the time she arrived at the Tiki Underground to pick up Matthew, every step of her journey had been captured by toll plaza cameras, license plate readers, and GPS tracking systems. She wasn't trying to hide. She wasn't covering her tracks. She was simply moving forward with a plan that had been brewing for years. After picking up Matthew, the two drove together to a gas station, where surveillance cameras captured him stepping inside to buy cigarettes, a red canned drink, and a bottle of Aquafina water. That bottle would later become one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case, a small detail that tied Chelsea directly to the crime scene. From there, they headed to an Airbnb on Ashbury Avenue in Cleveland, checking in for the night.
Surveillance footage showed them entering a sandwich shop together later that evening, appearing relaxed and comfortable in each other's company. They spent the night at the Airbnb, and whatever happened between those walls remains known only to Chelsea. But DNA evidence recovered later would reveal that the two had been intimate, a detail that complicates the narrative in ways that are difficult to reconcile. If Chelsea truly believed Matthew had assaulted her 4 years earlier, why would she sleep with him now? The answer to that question may never be fully understood, but it adds another layer of darkness to an already disturbing story. The next morning, March 6th, Matthew sent a text to his girlfriend at 9 in the morning, writing that he guessed she didn't miss him and that he hoped she was happy because he had already managed to upset the woman he was with. By 11 o'clock in the morning, he pulled up Google Maps and searched for directions to the Terra Vista Natural Study Area, a quiet trail system nestled inside Cuyahoga Valley National Park. At 9:45, GPS data confirmed that both Matthew and Chelsea had arrived at the park. Cell towers pinged Chelsea's phone at 9:59, placing her at the exact location where Matthew's body would later be found. At 10:29, Matthew sent his final text message to his girlfriend, saying simply that he would see her in a little while. He never got the chance. Only minutes later, a couple hiking nearby heard a single gunshot echo through the trees. Startled and afraid, they turned and rushed back toward the parking lot. When they arrived, they saw a small white smart car idling near the trailhead. They had no idea what they had just heard, no idea that a man lay dead only yards away from where they stood. Another couple arrived shortly after, unaware of the commotion. As they walked up the trail, they encountered Chelsea near an old cemetery, standing alone in the quiet morning light. She was calm, composed, and utterly unremarkable. They passed her without a second thought, having no reason to suspect that the woman they just saw had moments earlier fired a bullet into the back of a man's skull. Matthew's body was discovered 3 days later, on March 9th, when hikers stumbled upon him lying just off the trail near the cemetery. He was dressed entirely in black, wearing fingerless gloves, a leather jacket, a hoodie, jeans, and boots. Beside him lay the half-empty bottle of Aquafina he had purchased at the gas station. His identification was still in his pocket, making it easy for authorities to confirm his identity. The cause of death was immediately apparent: a single gunshot wound to the back of his head. Execution style. No signs of a struggle, no indication that he had seen it coming. Matthew had been led into those woods by someone he trusted, someone he thought was a friend, and he never had a chance to defend himself. When news of his death reached his family and friends, the grief was overwhelming, but no one took it harder than his mother, Tommy Lynn, whose world shattered completely. She would spend the weeks and months that followed consumed by a need for justice, a need that would eventually drive her to make a decision so desperate and so tragic that it would add yet another death to this already horrifying story.
As investigators began piecing together what had happened, attention quickly turned to the mysterious woman Matthew had been with that weekend. Nobody knew her name. Nobody had her contact information. But as evidence began to accumulate, a picture started to form. Surveillance footage from the toll plaza showed a white smart car passing through the Akron exit on the evening of March 5th, heading directly toward the bar where Matthew had been waiting. The supervisor, who had waved goodbye, confirmed that Matthew climbed into a small white car driven by a woman with brown hair. License plate readers matched the vehicle to Chelsea's husband. Cameras at the gas station captured Matthew buying the water bottle that would later be found beside his body, and footage from the Airbnb confirmed that the reservation had been made under Chelsea Perkins' name. GPS data, cell tower records, and surveillance footage all placed Chelsea and Matthew together at every step of their journey, from the bar to the Airbnb to the national park where Matthew's life ended. But the physical evidence was even more damning. The water bottle found next to Matthew's body contained DNA from both him and Chelsea. Her DNA was also discovered under his fingernails and on his body, confirming that the two had been intimate shortly before his death. The bullet recovered from his skull was a 9mm round, and the gun registered in Chelsea's name was a 9mm Springfield Armory. Ballistic testing would later show that the markings on the fatal bullet matched rounds fired from Chelsea's weapon with such precision that there was no room for doubt. And then there was the Facebook post. 3 days before the murder, on the same day Chelsea reconnected with Matthew online, she posted a single chilling sentence: "Dead men tell no tales." It was a statement so brazen, so absurdly incriminating, that it almost felt like a confession hidden in plain sight. After killing Matthew, Chelsea didn't flee in panic or try to disappear. Instead, she got back in her car and continued with her plans as if nothing had happened. Turnpike records tracked her driving north toward Toledo, crossing into Michigan, and arriving at a tattoo parlor called Family Inc. There, only hours after ending someone's life, Chelsea sat down and had a noose tattooed onto her forearm. She posted about it on Instagram, sharing a photo of herself smiling with the caption, "What a great weekend. Got a little blast from the babe in her sick-ass new shop. So proud." The image is haunting in its normalcy. Chelsea looks happy, relaxed, almost carefree. There is no hint of guilt, no shadow of remorse. She looks like someone who just had a fun weekend getaway, not someone who had just committed murder. The disconnect between the image and the reality is so jarring that it becomes difficult to process. How does someone smile for a photo when their hands are still metaphorically stained with blood? How does someone carry on as if nothing had happened when they know a body is lying cold in the woods? Chelsea returned home to Virginia the following day, slipping back into her life as if the weekend had been uneventful. She posted on social media, interacted with followers, and went about her routines without betraying any sign of what she had done. But investigators were closing in. On March 30th, they arrived at her home with a search warrant. Inside, hidden in a backpack, they found the 9mm Springfield Armory handgun along with Chelsea's identification card. Forensic analysis confirmed that the weapon had fired the bullet that killed Matthew. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and impossible to explain away. Yet despite having everything they needed to make an arrest, authorities hesitated. Perhaps they wanted to be cautious. Perhaps they were building an even stronger case. But for months, Chelsea remained free, living her life while Matthew's family waited for justice.
That delay proved catastrophic. Tommy Lynn, Matthew's mother, was consumed by grief and rage. She couldn't understand why the woman who killed her son was still walking free. She couldn't accept that justice was moving so slowly. And so, in a moment of desperation and fury, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Tommy Lynn and her husband purchased a fake UPS uniform, loaded a gun, and drove to Washington, D.C., where they believed Chelsea was living. When they arrived at what they thought was Chelsea's address, Tommy Lynn knocked on the door, her hands trembling as she concealed the weapon beneath her delivery jacket. A woman answered. In that split second, Tommy Lynn made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. She fired 2 bullets into the woman's stomach. But the woman who opened the door wasn't Chelsea Perkins. She was a complete stranger, an innocent person who had no connection to Matthew's death whatsoever. Tommy Lynn had shot the wrong person. Realizing the magnitude of her mistake, she fled the scene with police in pursuit. But Tommy Lynn knew there was no way out. In a final act of despair, she raised the gun to her own head and pulled the trigger. In an instant, the Dunmire family lost not only a son, but a mother as well, both consumed by the same darkness that had started it all. Chelsea was finally arrested on December 9, 2021, nearly 9 months after Matthew's murder. Neighbors watched as she was led away in handcuffs, her expression blank and emotionless. During questioning, she denied any involvement, claiming she had no idea how her DNA ended up on Matthew's body or how the bullet from her gun ended up in his skull. Her story was implausible, contradicted by mountains of evidence, and impossible to believe. But she stuck to it, at least initially. Many who knew Chelsea were shocked by the arrest. Yes, she openly disliked Matthew. Yes, she had accused him of assault years earlier. But murder? That seemed a leap too far. She had no criminal record, no history of violence, no documented psychological issues. On paper, she appeared stable, even if her double life as Selena Savage raised questions. But as the case moved forward, it became clear that Chelsea had meticulously planned every step. She booked the Airbnb. She brought the gun. She lured Matthew into an isolated location where no one would hear or see what happened. She fired a single shot to the back of his head, ensuring he wouldn't survive. And then she drove to Michigan to get a tattoo, celebrating her actions as if they were an accomplishment worth marking on her skin forever. Prosecutors initially offered Chelsea a plea deal, 27 to 31 years in prison if she admitted to the murder. She refused, maintaining her innocence and preparing to go to trial. But as the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore, Chelsea's resolve began to crack. On May 27, 2025, she changed her plea, admitting to second-degree murder. In exchange, her sentence was reduced to 20 to 25 years, a significant reduction from the original offer. If the court accepts the agreement, Chelsea will spend the next 2 decades behind bars, finally facing consequences for the life she took and the devastation she caused. She will be in her 60s before she has a chance at freedom, and by then, the world she once knew will have moved on without her. The story of Chelsea Perkins and Matthew Dunmire is not just about a murder. It is about unresolved trauma, the failures of the justice system, and the terrifying reality that some people can wear masks so convincing that no one sees the monster beneath until it's too late.